Welcome into Dynamo Weekly, our season recap edition. Sebastian Salazar, Glenn Davis, Tom Dart, Darrell Lovell. We've assembled a murderer's row here for you guys. We've had a ton of conversations on the practice field off camera, so let's kind of put it all out there now, and we'll start with the biggest topic. Dominic Kinnear departing for San Jose at the end of the 2014 season. What is Dom's legacy? And Glenn, we'll begin with you.
Want to start with me? Okay, we'll start with me. Even though our guests are here, I thought we were going to...
No, you go ahead and we'll let them
Well,
tag
Dom's
in on
legacy is certainly going to be winning. It's certainly going to be teams that had really competitive streaks and strains. I think the definition of the 4-4-2 obviously is something that is almost synonymous with Dominic Kinnear, although in the last couple of years we've seen him organically move into some tactical flexibility, I think. But I think it's just the spirit. I think it's the two cups the first 2 years really are going to stick out to me in a very big way, because I thought his leadership was exceptional then, and he brought a team with families and relocated them to Houston, helped to lead in a very difficult time when facilities weren't even in place, and then went on to win 2 championships. So I don't think it's anything but good. I think that's the way we need to look at it, and as he said, it's probably best for both franchises.
Yeah, time for change, but the legacy is still fairly intact, right?
Yeah, he's the only head coach the Dynamo have ever known. 9 years is an incredibly long time for any manager, any coach of any franchise to be in charge. As Glenn said, he set the tone early on with the success, which has come to define the expectations that are as strong today as they were 5 years ago, as strong today as they were 8 years ago. He's been a dominating personality. He's been a true leader. He's had success on the field, and he's also set the tone for how the players should conduct themselves in terms of the high expectations, the style, the aggressiveness, the real hatred of losing, which is all part of Dom's personality himself, which he's very successfully imprinted onto that group of players and the group of players that started in 2006, and then subsequently that legacy has been passed down, and those expectations have carried on through subsequent generations of Dynamo players.
Darrell, we talk a lot about this time of change, but what are maybe some things from the Dominic Kinnear era that ought to stick around before all these kind of wholesale changes take place?
I think the way the team conducts itself day in and day out, I think one thing, if you've ever been to a Dynamo training, you can see it's very professional, it's run very well, and they work the maximum of practicing winning every day. The competitiveness in training that has been there when the team has been good, that's a lot of what you see. I think that has to say, as Tom alluded to, the hating to lose, kind of that mentality, I think that needs to stay. I think, and also the player development from getting the most out of players. MLS is a league where you have to find talent and then maximize it. And for whatever you say about Dominic Kinnear, he has been able to maximize his players, maximize his talent, whether it be by putting them in the right system, getting them to do the right stuff in training, whatever it may be. I think that's one of the big things that they need to keep around, because that's how you succeed in MLS. You have to keep that.
The biggest change coming, guys, is this new technical director. It's going to be a structural change. There's so many questions here. What is the technical director going to oversee? What are the kind of important qualities this person should have? I just kind of want to get a sense from the three of you what you're looking for, what you think the club ought to be looking for in this kind of critical hire.
Well, first of all, it depends on what the club's criteria is for a technical director. That's a very broad statement, and it's like sporting director. It depends on what the Houston Dynamo want to do when it comes to defining what that position is. Now, is this somebody that's going to come in that has an unbelievable understanding of the grassroots process and player development? Is it somebody that is going to be more involved in the salary cap of Major League Soccer and acquiring players? Is it somebody who's got a tremendous network in South America and Europe when it comes to a scouting system? I think it's all up in the air. The one thing we do know is it's not going to be a position where a coach has to report. Chris Canetti told me that on an interview on the radio. I think if it was me, I want it to be somebody who knows how to develop soccer players, who has the grassroots experience, and then can carry that over into all those other categories. There's a lot of boxes that have to be checked off, and they have to work with a coach. They have to be another lens on the outside, and this is what I think Dominic Kinnear, in some ways, needed. This is just me from the outside. If I can say something about this, he needed another lens to look through, and I don't think he got it. I think all of us as human beings, we have to have somebody who checks and balances us. If we come on radio and TV and you guys are writers and we don't have anybody check and balancing us, well, it's a dangerous position to be in, and I say that respectfully.
And it makes the job tougher to do.
So
right?
A good technical director is somebody who's going to be removed from the fray, is going to be able to oversee all these areas of the club, and he's also going to be able to take a head coach aside and provide some wonderful insight from the outside, per se.
So let me ask you guys, I mean, Glenn kind of checks off 3 very different boxes. What are the most important boxes, or is there a most important one?
In my opinion, it's scouting. I think that's where, if you are an MLS coach and you are trying to win an MLS Cup and be competitive on the field, the scouting part gets lost in the fray. I think Glenn makes a great point about player development, so I'll leave that one. But for me, it's scouting. It's getting out there and doing honest-to-goodness scouting, where it's not, hey, I like this guy on DVD, I like his clip, let's bring him in and take a look. If you can have a guy behind the scenes that's paying attention to the international market, that's paying it, or the domestic market, and identifying guys and making that process easier for a coach, I think that translates on the field quickly. And I think that's what this team needs. This team needs to right the ship very quickly.
And Darrell makes a tremendous point. A technical director is someone who will be an asset to a coach, to an organization.
Absolutely.
Because of their experience. And I don't think there's any question that's how it has to be looked upon.
Yeah, the relationship is absolutely crucial, because it will break. If it breaks down, then it just doesn't work. You need to have a head coach and a technical director who will get on. Maybe they'll be different in age, different in background, but they need to respect each other, know where the authority boundaries lie, and trust each other. Otherwise, it just won't work.
Yeah, this league is evolving like crazy. You know it. You know it, Sebastian. I know it. There's going to come a time down here in Houston when, if you put the right system in place, I firmly believe in this city that you can produce players with a USL team between the academy and the first team. You can produce players that will start at 19 and 20 years of age.
There's no doubt that the talent base is here, and the academy in some ways has yet to develop it. Let's focus on the head coach, though, kind of the next big hire that'll come after the technical director. So many clubs go to the former player, and not just a former player anywhere in the league, but a former player that has represented their badge. There are some guys that fit that criteria here with the Dynamo. Do you think that's something this club, though, needs to look at?
Well, I think it's a big risk at this point. You have to have a genuine background, I think, in coaching. I think it's a big risk. I mean, look, even the guys like Ben Olsen, Mike Petke, these guys spent some time as assistants. The choices here would be Wade Barrett or Steve Ralston. I would assume they're going to get interviewed. They've had experience. They've been around Dominic Kinnear, a great manager. But I think you have to be very careful with that, because there's a difference between symbolism and names, and it doesn't necessarily translate into good coaching. And you have to have a background of coaching. And I mean, you have to know how to put a practice session together. You have to lead men. There are so many elements that come into this that make it such a difficult position.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few other names, Craig Weibel, Paul Dalglish, but I mean, is that something that this club needs to be beholden to?
Needs to be beholden to? Absolutely not. This club needs to go out and get the best coach it can get, because this club needs to win in this market with the way the fans are here. And it's just a true idea about the fans here. The fans here support winners.
Yeah.
This club needs to win. You cannot hinge your hopes on Craig Weibel unless you think Craig Weibel is the best choice.
I'm going to stop you for a second, because Craig is working at his coaching career.
Absolutely.
I think what you were saying is, do you pluck somebody straight from the playing field into a coaching job? We already learned that doesn't work with Ryan Nelson in Toronto. We're talking about Craig Weibel is a guy working at his career.
He would be a very good one.
But he's a Dynamo tie, and that's the point is, do you need, this organization has the Dynamo way. That's a big thing that Chris Canetti talked about. Tom, to assume that you're not going to look at that type of background, I think is ignoring something that we're also kind of building up on another front.
That might have been the imperative if the team hadn't struggled this year and not made the playoffs, but the fact that it has not made the playoffs and so has not had a successful season gives Chris Canetti, Dynamo owners, leadership, the mandate to blow things up and completely change it. I mean, it was different last year. The team was very close to reaching the MLS Cup final for a third year in a row. Now, with Dom Kinnear leaving and the team having a down year, this is a big opportunity for the people, if they want to completely rebuild and really go away from the past. So it's a difficult balance for them to strike. How far do they change the squad? How far do they look to the future and kind of reinvent the team?
I don't think there's any question it's not going to be reinvented. My interviews with Chris, they feel there's a lot of pieces still here. that they're going to make some additions. Obviously, a new coach and a new technical director are going to want some things their way, but Chris is very much involved with all this decision making. So I don't see it changing a lot. And listen, I think all have to be considered. I think you have to consider anybody who's in MLS, Pat Onstad, Robert Mascant in Columbus. I put forth Efrain Flores, who checks off a lot of categories and will fill these seats back here and re-engage the Mexican community and the Hispanic community. There's all kinds of names that have come up. John Spencer is here local now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's going to be a very, very interesting decision that has to be made, but it's got to be the right one.
There are options both inside the Dynamo box and outside the Dynamo box. All right, we got to take a break. When we return, we're going to take a look back over all of 2014. What went wrong, what went right, and I'm going to ask the guys, who was your team MVP? Don't go anywhere. Dynamo Weekly, back in a moment. Welcome back to Dynamo Weekly. Sebastian, Glenn, Tom, Darrell here with you as we continue our season recap show. Let's go over 2014. I'll open it up with a simple question. What went wrong? It's the first time the team missed the playoffs since 2010.
Darrell?
That's not so simple. Wait a minute.
Well, let's start it there.
I think what went wrong for this team is, and we were kind of talking about it off the air, this team has always prided itself on being hard to play against, or whatever that means to them. They weren't this year. They let in goals by the bushel, which was kind of odd because they were very good in the league in shutouts, but when they gave up goals, they came in streams, they came in bunches. And this team just simply, for a lot of the season, couldn't stop anybody. Yeah. In an MLS, you can't be successful if you can't keep the ball out of the net, if you can't make yourself difficult to play against on the defensive side. Keep goals out, shut the lanes down, don't allow easy opportunities, and when those came, they came in bunches against this team, and it just did them in.
Glenn, when you look back at the narrative of 2014, what kind of sticks out to you?
The narrative? Well, I think the team was not very organized in the beginning, and I think a lot of that was due to injury, national team call-ups. I think that certainly had an effect on it. That can't be an excuse. I was disappointed personally that in the absence of others, that the depth and other players did not produce and perform. And a lot of it was elementary mistakes. We can't sit here and put lipstick on it. There were elementary mistakes. This is why the hole was dug so deep, and that's why it was very difficult for this team to ever come back, despite after Luis Garrido came here, you know, the team very much improved, and it was so black and white. Everybody could see it. Right. The team all of a sudden had a good team shape. The team was aligned together, moved together. It all came together with one player, Luis Garrido. And everybody bags on the back four, but I got to tell you, those guys did not get the protection that they deserved in the early parts of the game. David Horst is a perfect example of that. I think played much better the last 10 or 11 games. It's
funny you mentioned the depth, and Tom, I'll spin this your way. The Dynamo kind of didn't have bodies or didn't have playmakers when Brad and Boniek and all that went down. And for the last few years, we've heard about all these salary cap issues. Was this kind of paying the price for the last 3 years of good runs and keeping a team together?
I don't know about that. I think Brad Davis has been so valuable to this team that when they lost him, and for a time he was producing an assist or a goal every game for 8 games, they lost that production and they just weren't able to find it. I think they had confidence in the depth players in the reserves, but it just didn't happen for those players on the field, and they went into a bit of a tailspin in midsummer, strangely, just after beating LA here, and then lost 5 games on the spin, and never really recovered from that. And by the time Davis got back, and by the time Garrido arrived and DeMarcus Beasley arrived, there was just too much ground to make up, and the team was much tighter and much more competitive, but you know, the teams around them started winning as well, and so they couldn't make up that ground. I think it was really showed how dependent the team has been on Brad Davis in the past couple of years by the fact that he wasn't there and they struggled so much to score.
Is another lesson that we take from this year, because the narrative for the Dynamo was always like, well, we'll be good at the end of the season. We'll figure this out at the end of the year. The games in March and April and May. Everybody calm down, relax. Did we learn this year that you can't relax in March, April, and May, that if you go as bad as they did for those 3 months, there's some math you just can't make up?
Look, this league, you can't continue to try and just pull it off at the end of the year. I think there's a lot of problems there, because the other part of the problem is you have to sell this team on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. There has to be entertainment here on a daily basis.
Games have to mean something.
Absolutely, and I don't think this is a league, and I've said this many, many times, where there's a lot of consequence to not playing well, because there's always the fallback position of late in the season, we're going to make a run, And I think habitually we believe that's going to happen here every year.
Yeah.
This year you didn't feel it was going to happen. As much as you wanted to, as much as I wanted to, I just didn't feel that the Dynamo could make this many points up this quickly. So, you know, I think one of the goals of this organization certainly has to be a winning team throughout the year, throughout the regular season, because it helps people selling tickets, it helps sponsorships, all these other elements and working pieces that go on in a professional soccer club.
I think Sebastian and Glenn really hit at the point. I don't know if they learned that this year. I think they knew what the consequence there, and eventually it's going to happen. It's going to happen. But I think they kind of created that mentality on. There was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy for these guys. They've done it so many times. They've done it for the last 2 years. They were poor in the regular season for large chunks in the last 2 years, but they managed to bring it around. They managed to pull it out. I think they kind of caught themselves up in that mentality. I think they kind of did it to themselves mentally on how they were approaching the season.
Sometimes we hear judges at the end of the year, and you know, as a fan and somebody selling tickets and as an organization, and I'm not saying they said that, but I think there's that prevailing feeling around Major League Soccer that you know, we can always turn it on in the playoffs, and that is something this organization I think will look closely at and is going to want to change. And
I do think they said it though. I think they said it the whole year up until about August. And to be fair, when August hit and they got Garrido and Beasley to a little bit of an extent, it started to look that way. But no, I think they I think that was their mantra, both to the media and within their own group. I think that may have been the problem, is that they never really felt the urgency.
All right, real quick, team MVPs. Go ahead.
Quickly, for me, it's Giles Barnes. Even during the bad times, the guy was pushing. I think he's led by example this year, not only the 11 goals, but for me, clearly Giles Barnes.
Yeah, I totally agree. He's set to be the top scorer for the second year in a row. Great skill and also great work ethic that we saw this season. Commitment, running back. He gets, you know, kicked every game by defenders, but he gets up and carries on. And he's been consistently excellent for this team.
I'm going to go a different route. I agree with you guys. It's Giles Barnes. The guy who made the biggest impacts, Luis Garrido.
Yeah.
I think he's the guy who kind of turned the season for them, as Glenn's kind of pointed out. He turned the season for them. For me, if you extrapolate it out, it's Luis Garrido.
Agree with Darrell. I mean, except for the fact that it was 11 games.
Yeah.
And Giles, the thing I like about Giles, wow factor goals.
Absolutely.
Fans love it.
Yep.
And maybe the most damning thing about all this is there's only really those two choices. And that's kind of the story of 2014. All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, we're looking ahead to 2015. What's next for the Houston Dynamo as they move on to what club president Chris Canetti has dubbed Dynamo 3.0. Dynamo Weekly rolls on here on CSN. Sebastian Salazar, Glenn Davis, Tom Dart, Darrell Lovell. Looking ahead to 2015 and really the off-season ahead of 2015. Guys, how much change do we expect to be coming over the next few months?
Well, I think there's definitely going to be change because if there's a new technical director coming in and a new coach, they're going to want to see things maybe a little bit differently. I think there's some real immediate places that we all probably know and can look at. The goalkeeping position, and I would say you don't want to act too fast on that one because Tally Hall basically put this team in the playoffs, not this year, but the year before. But Tyler Derrick has emerged there. And then the other one is at the left back position where DeMarcus Beasley has come in, and the highest paid player on the team for a two-time All-Star. What's the future of Corey Ash?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I do wonder what if the playing ideology will change, the purpose of play will change.
Some big names that are kind of on the chopping block. I think that, you know, the two you mentioned, Omar Cummings, Jermaine Taylor. I mean, there's some big decisions to be made here, isn't there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think here, when you look, I think the middle of defense is probably going to get the most attention, especially from the outside. I think for most people, it was the center backs that kind of failed at times this year. Not to say it was all the center backs, it certainly wasn't, but I think that's going to be a point of emphasis for the Dynamo. And what do you do up top? What is the next coach going to want to do? Is the next coach going to want to have a Brad Davis on the wing? Will he want him in the middle of the park? I think there's going to be a lot. There may be more holes that we just don't know yet because of the guy who's coming in.
Yeah, it's impossible to be confident about that until we know the identity of the technical director and the head coach. But I would think it's inevitable that some, long-time senior players are going to move on. As Glenn said, you've got two very good goalkeepers. It doesn't make any sense to have two goalkeepers who could start at a variety of MLS clubs. It doesn't make any sense to have two left backs who could both start for a variety of MLS clubs. So there'll need to be changes to rebalance the squad, and yeah, maybe bring in some exciting young players for, as Glenn said, to really get some showmen in, some Giles Barnes style, exciting play.
Would you prefer to see this team spend in the MLS market, maybe it's like a DC United did, or in the international market, which might end up selling you more seats here at BBVA?
I think both have to be considered. I don't think there's any question. We are the gateway to South America. There are some incredible values and buys if you look for them. MLS teams have proven that in Argentina and in South America based on leagues that are failing and teams that are struggling financially. But that's going to be for the head coach and the technical director to pull off. I mean, obviously, I think if we look at the teams that are successful this year, they've got dynamic strikers, and that's where money's being spent. Okay, the LAs, the Seattles are spending money at the striker position. Probably another center back to put into the competitive mix. But I don't think without any question, you got to look everywhere and anywhere.
I think the quickest fix, though, just to be honest, is from inside MLS.
Right.
So I think maybe this season you focus on MLS, you get better kind of the DC way. Then once the structure is established, you kind of look and you use that established scouting network that you're going to put together to get the good signing from South America or Central America.
There's a lot of big questions, but also some excitement for the Dynamo as we head towards the offseason. All right, Darrell, Tom, we're going to cut you loose. Glenn, stick around. We got to sign this thing off in just a moment. Welcome back to Dynamo Weekly. Sebastian Salazar, Glenn Davis with you for one last segment of our final show. Glenn, as this is our goodbye, I'll give you the floor and just some final thoughts as we sign this
I'll
thing
make
off.
it quick. Our producer, Van Williams, has led with tremendous leadership here. Kurt, our cameraman, Jonathan, who's worked on the show, camera as well. We thank all of them. Personally, I have enjoyed so much working with you and your passion for soccer, Sebastian. And then I would say to the fans and the viewers, look, the sport's going to continue to grow in this city. The Dynamo will grow. The game will grow. Continue to have opinion. Seek it out on the radio, on the internet, and the places that you can follow your sport.
Absolutely. Dynamo Weekly may be going away, but I'll say the soccer enthusiasm that I've seen over the last couple of years, sure hope it does not. For all of us here at CSN, thanks for watching.